Okay, so let's take a look at how to learn C# from game development context. So we are not going through any game development specific code, but we are going to take a look at some of the basics of C#. So for that, I suggest going to Visual Studio and download the community edition. And once you do that, you can open Visual Studio like this. And here you see, I already have a lot of previous projects here, and I can create the new one by clicking on this create a new project, right? Then I'll have to check for C#, then Windows, and I can choose console, desktop, or any other specific. So currently the console is good enough. So now here we will take a look at this particular console app, or you can go with .NET framework. So let's select .NET framework, click next. Here you can choose between the .NET framework, which are previous one. So if you don't want that old framework, instead if you want core, you can go back, and here you can choose the console app, which will select .NET 6, 7, or whatever that's within the range of .NET Core. So we'll select console app for .NET Core. Click next. Let's say Sharp Core is the name of project. Then we click next. Choose the framework 6.0. If you have 7, which is not going to be LTS obviously, but if you check for 8 or whatever the version that you check at this time, you can select that. Click create. It should create a new project, and it should open one solution explorer like this on right, then program.cs here, and your SQL Server Object Explorer on left. I'm going to let's say put it in, let's say, auto hide option. So I'll just have to click on it in order to open, right? So instead of letting it consume the space, we will just hide it, right? You can change the layout by going to window, then go through the layouts changes such as float, dock, right, and hide them. So I'm not going to cover that part because that would be too much deep into Visual Studio, and we don't want to get too deep into language. We just want to go deep enough for game development, right? So here you see console right line. So if you check some of the code from the web, you'll find that it has that using system, then you have a class, then within that class you have a main function. But here you see only one statement that says hello world, and it will output this. So we'll just make a few modifications to check whether it is working at all or not. So we'll just run this, and here see it is showing the output. So if we hit enter, the window will close. Now coming back to Solution Explorer, here you see your project. It has its dependencies where you see frameworks, within which you have .NET Core .app. This will call all the namespaces required for projects. So using system, then say system data core using IO, right, system IO, all of that is called through this framework, and then dependencies, right? Then comes the file call program.cs. Here you see one statement that says hello DevNami, right? So instead of this, what we will do is we will go through some of the variables, right? So let's say we choose string and say my string, right, and we call for our name, right, and then we use console right line. As you can see, it auto completes that. So if I use tab twice, it will accept that. Save this, and now we will run this to see how it goes. So it is showing the output of my string. So this is one of the variable that holds your text-based data, right? Similarly, I can go for something like integer number equals to, let's say, 22, and then console write line number tab accepted, and if we run this, we should see the output which is showing number, right? So we have seen so far is this number. Then we can also take a look at few more, like let's say bool is valid set to true, right? And let's say if I choose console write line, then we have number. Instead of accepting that, what I'm going to do is just going to use is valid. It will autocomplete that as well, making it easier for you to write the code, right? So what we have so far is first being our number, second being our bool, then we have s byte which has a range of say -128 to +127. So we have level set to 20. Make sure you are using semicolon. Now if I use console write line, and then for level we just use tab again, right? So we have our short byte. Then we also need to have a float value or double value. So float will basically take your floating point with, let's say, this decimal number 159, right? And if I use console dot write line, I can use num. So it auto completes that. And to tell you that your float has a range from 1.5 into 10 raised to -45 to 3.4 into 10 raised to whatever the power that is, right? So that's for your float. Similarly, you can also use let's say double. Here you have to mention f, then it will remove that error. Then you can also run this to see the output. And here you see your integer value, boolean value, then your short byte and float. So that's for actually your variables. Now to go for the basic, we can also cover some of the operators. The most common that will be used are relational operator within games, also arithmetic and assignment. Okay, unary operator and few other I have not much use, but that's just my context. In your context, you may have to go deeper and check on all the operators, right? So let's say if I have value of x to, let's say, 20, integer y set to say 10, and if I write console write line, and within that I choose x plus y, right? And then next line I use, let's see, x minus y, console write line, x multiplied by y. So here you see the star operator that you have on keyboard, you can use that. And then comes console dot write line, where you have x divided by y. Sorry, so I had to make use of that tab to avoid the error. So this is for your arithmetic operators. You can also make use of modulus when you want to get the remainder, right? So let's run this and see if it's correct. So we have 30, then 10, then 200, and finally the 2, which is correct. So this is for our arithmetic operator. Similarly, we also have assignment operator. So what if I choose plus equals to say 2, minus equals to 5, then multiply equals to 2, right? And then divide equals to 5, right? All of that is possible as well. So if we run this and check the output, it should show us the assignment operator output being 22, correct? Then 5 removed, right? So it already picked the value of x being 22 and then it removed 5, so 17. So next immediately value of x becomes 17 multiplied by 2, 34, and then 6 out of that, which gives you the value by division, and it is not considering the remainder, so we had to use modulus to get the remainder, right? So that's for assignment operator. Another thing is relational operations. So for relational operation, let's say if I have something like say console write line, then x equals to y. So we want to check whether we have value of x equals to y. Now here in this case we already know because we are looking at the value of x and y. However, in case of let's say user input where user is choosing value of x and y, then we don't know that, right? So we'll have to use the operators like this, right? Then comes again one more condition, right? Here we choose, let's say x is greater than y, right? Similarly, if we choose x less than y, as you can see, IntelliSense is very smart that it has checked I used greater than before. In next statement, it immediately corrected with showing x less than y. So it's getting interesting that it is saving me a lot of time. So console dot write line, and then comes this x being greater than equals to y. Let's say if we can get the case, as you can see, the IntelliSense managed to also show me the another condition being less than equals to y, right? Then finally we have console dot write line where x not equals to y, right? So these are some of the conditions that we can check for relational operator, right? So hope I didn't say assignment instead of relational, okay, because I was too much into this IntelliSense. I actually forgot about that. So here you see first condition being false, second being true, false, true, false. It's giving us this boolean output, right? So that was for our operators. One more thing which is pretty simple but I didn't cover that is the comments, right? So in C# you have comments like this, right? Similarly, there is also one more way of doing comments. Let's say I can end this here and in next line I can get back. So this being the multi-line one, it will auto-complete even the multi-line comments. So IntelliSense in Visual Studio is getting pretty cool. That is your multi-line comment. You already checked the single line one and the XML comment, which is going to be something like this. So XML comment, right? So these three type of comment that we are covering here, right? Now one more thing is let's say if we choose to write our other code, something like, let's say, if else condition, switch case, then for loop, do while loop, function, etc. We'll have to make use of public static void main, right? Typically that's the function from where your program gets called. So before that, let's see, if I have value of integer something like 5, right? If I want to come up with a condition, say if x is less than 4, right? And if I choose to show console write line output that says x is small, right? And here finally we can use else block, or we can let it run like this, right? And here you see, without having to actually use our main method, we can execute this. So it's x less than 4, no, so it's false, so it failed to show any other output. So we can write console write line x is 5, right? And if I run this now, I can execute it like this, right? So this was our if condition, and within else I can put it, right? And here you see it's much more clean. You can also cascade with one more condition within else. So else if you can use for the condition something like if it's greater than 10 or so, and then output the value, right? So that's if else condition for you. Similarly, there is one more thing which is here in case is, let's say number is 2 and I want to check. So I make use of switch case and I pass on the number, right? Then my case being first is, let's say, console write line and number is 1, right? Okay, then comes break. Now break is where your case will come out and it won't further execute any other case. So case is 2 here. Now if I choose console write line, its number is 2, right? So that's another break, and then default, and here you see which is default number, right? Now if we choose to come out of any of the case, we will use break, and if you use continue instead of break, it will continue to execute the rest of the code. So break and continue can go further into detail, right? There is also one which is exit and so, which I choose not to cover for now, right? So this is one of the switch case that you can check. Here you see number is 2, the condition properly checked. So if I use any case which is not listed here, it should default to 2, to whatever the case default covers. Default is unknown, right? So if I run this, so it shouldn't go to 2 and instead it goes to default, right? So we covered the if else, then switch. Now let's cover the loops. Now in case of loops, we can simply go for, let's say I have value of integer I, and then let's say if you want any other, you can also have that. So within for loop, what I will do is I can set the value to, set the value for 1, right? Then semicolon, we used to separate the condition for loop, then less than equals to, let's say 5, and I choose to increment value of I, which is within for loop, right? right? So console write line I, right? So what it will do is it will start from value of 1 until it reaches 5 and output that and come out of loop. So this was for value increment. You can also decrement this by having high value 10 and go for 5 and decrement with double dash, right? So we'll have increment for now, right? Similarly, you can also have cascaded loops. So for loop first, then again you can form another loop, output let's say value of I, then inside that j, and we can output those, right? So you have seen this, the basic for loop that you can have, right? So let's run this, and here you see 1 to 5 and then it exits, right? So this is one of the for loops. You can also have for loop to output your, let's say, collections like array on console, right? So after for loop, what we can do is have do while loop. So let's give it our integer I some value. Now here let's go with 2, and 2 takes some output. So within console write line, I just want to output value of I, right? And then I want to increment value of I, right? And then I want to have a condition at the end of my do while loop where I needs to be, let's say, less than equals to 5, or let's say 6 here, and then I will have to use semicolon to end do while loop. If I run this, it should output value 1 to 6, right? So it will execute at least once due to the condition that we are setting. It will execute console write line at least one. So if I choose I less than 2, it will at least have one output on screen, right? So that's one do while loop. Let's also take a look at, let's say, while loop. So we'll keep the value of I to 1. Next is while. I need to think of conditions. So I less than, let's say, 5. Yeah, let's go with that. Now within console write line, we'll let I be there. Then we can have I plus plus, right? Now you don't have to go this way. You can also decrement it. Keep the value of I 10, let it decrement up to 5, right? And then use I minus minus. That also works. So that basically used to increment your variable, right? So if I choose to run this, it should show you the output, right? So we have covered some of the basics. What we are left now with is function, then we have class and file handling, and some of the other simple collections as well. We'll go through that. Okay, now let's take a look at functions. So here in C#, functions are called methods. So we'll see first how to write or create a method. We use keyword static void and then name of your method, right? Then we will use bracket, and then inside that, let's say console write line, and let's say make it say hello, and then use semicolon. Now that we created a function, we need to also call it, right? So let's just save and see the output. Now here you see we have managed to also call it, right? We can close console, and then we will see that this is the name of the function. Okay, as you can see, this is the name of my method. it requires the keyword static and void. So unless it is returning something, I will continue to write void. If it returns something like integer, double values, I can change that instead of void, right? And next is our my demo. This is to call this particular method, right? So if you have a class where you want to call this, you can make the declaration like this, right? So this is one way. It also accepts the parameter, right? So if I remove this and start again, can use static void and then my demo, but this time I want it to accept something. So let's say it has string name and integer number, right? And if I want it to have console write line that says name, then I use name, and then within this I use, let's say, number. So this number should be age, right? So let's have that plus number, right? So that's what we are returning here for now. And then when I'm calling this particular method, I can simply pass on the string and the age with number, right? And if I close this statement and run this, it should show me this particular output with name and age. I can manage the spacing between the same, right? And let's say I can also use pipe. Hopefully that should work. Right here you see name and age, right? So basically we learn how to create a method that doesn't send anything. Then we also checked the method that takes the parameters and sends something, right? So currently console write a line that we created within our first method that didn't send anything other than that statement was our basic function definition, and then we made a call by simply typing the name, and then in next example we passed parameters with one string, one being integer, right? And then we also called it with the name and age. So that's our method with parameters. You also can go through recursive method, also how to see the overloading of your methods. You can go through that, right? So that requires much depth for you. If you need it to use within your games, you can go further deep. Okay, now next thing we will take a look at is class, right? So let's say if I create a class called employee, and within that I'm going to declare a few things. So public integer, say age, right? And also if I choose to have public string name, sorry, to complete it to print, so public string name and age. Then next is, let's say if I have public void, and if I want to pass on, let's say, work description, so let's have just as work that takes string called work, or let's say title, right? And within that what we do is console write line title, right? And within this class what we will do, we will create, okay, next is typing public static void, then main, m needs to be uppercase, then string, sorry, and we pass on arguments, so args, right? And within this what we have is, let's say, okay, so spell mistake, right? So public static void main, this needs to be there within your class, because otherwise it should basically throw an error. So here let's go with employee, then let's have it emp and then new employee, right? So IntelliSense got our object correct. So now if I want to have employee age calculated or being sent, I can simply have emp dot age set to say 38, then employee dot name set to say my name, right? And then finally I can call within console write line, and then here name, right? And then call for emp.name, then let's say a pipe to separate them, then age, right? Then simply call for emp.age, right? Similarly, I can also have console.writeLine and then simply call for emp.work, right? And here I can pass on the title, say developer, right? And then close it. So it's showing me error because the thing is I can simply just use this directly instead of going through console write line. I can simply have developer being passed here and it should output the title, right? So let's see if this works. Now here you see the name and age and our method also being called. So what we have done so far here is we created a class, then we have some public members of that class being age and name, then we also have one method that takes string argument and returns the output, right? So every class has public static void main. Pay attention to m being uppercase, then string and argument, right? So inside that I created object of this class, right? And thanks to IntelliSense, it also explained me how to add age and your name to that particular object's value, right? So if you want to create a new employee, you will have to come up with new objects, say employee 2, 3, 4, so on. Then the values will change, right? So you have like class which is acting like a template for your employees data, and then you output as you require for that particular employee, right? So this was pretty basic idea. When you have your some of the games code that you want to reuse, you can make use of class. So you can go even deeper with, let's say in case of Java you have like interface where you extend some templates into another class, right? So basically think of class as your particular container within which you have a template of your employees, and you access the data by creating its object and pass it the values, right? So this is in context of game, right? Now let's say here we'll be using system.io, right? This is for our accessing of files. So here you see it has gone gray because such declaration is no longer needed. You can simply go with, let's say, string, then txt, then we go for, let's say, right? So next thing, I want this to be added within a text file, so I will use file.write all text, and within that I can pass on text and I can give this one file name f1.txt, right? So basically I created a file, added this string into that. Now I need to also read it, so read txt, right? So equals to file dot read all text, right? Then I can pass on f1.txt, right? So our project will contain that file when we run this, right? Then comes the console write line and read text, right? Notice that I didn't use the using system IO here, right? So let's run this and see how it returns the output. Notice that we have our output. We can close it and let's see if our solution explorer has that. And here you see, if we check solution explorer and open the folder, you will notice that within bin debug and .NET 6 we have this text file created as well. It should contain this particular line of statement, right? So this is pretty much the basics you can go ahead with, but all of this is assuming that I have covered some of the basics that you already know any other programming language, right? So if you're completely new into C#, then I suggest going further deeper into C# and